Hi, I'm Justin Lokitz, and this is the Design Ship Podcast, your weekly guide to mastering the leap from creative expert to confident design leader, packed with actionable insights, proven strategies, and real world wisdom. In this episode, I chatted with Kevin Flores, a double threat product and design leader, about everything from the value of design, blurring the boundaries of product and design, and even AI. Kevin recently co-authored the Design Career Handbook with his wife, Janine Flores, who is also a longtime design leader, which is indispensable for any early to mid-career designer or creative. Keep listening to learn where your big breaks will probably come from, and remember to subscribe to the show and the Design Shift newsletter if you enjoy the episode. Thanks. For anyone who doesn't know, this is Kevin Flores, and for over 25 years, he's been a product and design leader building human-centered teams that have launched innovative solutions across all kinds of domains: content publishing, education, training, interactive media, entertainment, social and professional networking, B2B, SaaS, consumer health. Like, kind of Kevin's done it all, both as an entrepreneur, but also as someone working for some of these big companies and everything in between. I think what's also super cool is that you recently-ish spoke to some students at CCA, mostly grad students in design and the MBA, about your recently co-authored book that you co-authored with Janine, your wife, the Design Career Handbook. And you've done this both as longtime design leaders. And of course, I read this and I purchased a bunch for my students, and I can definitely attest it's a terrific resource. In fact, I think all of those copies that were sitting on the shelf, I purchased 7 of them. I think they've all kind of left the studio, so I'm hoping they come back. But if they don't, we'll buy more because it's definitely indispensable. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Justin. I mean, I just want to say, I really appreciate all of that intro. And it all means a lot because you're also a creator, an
Thanks.
entrepreneur,
Yeah.
author, and of course, an educator. So that your words mean a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we sort of met in each other in a circuitous way through I think a Slack group through Adrian Pittman. But
That's
yeah,
right.
yeah, really good to get to know you. So maybe let's just start with the regular interview part. Tell me, a little bit about yourself and your journey as both a product and design leader. How'd you get here? And what do you do?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so
Um,
much. It has been several decades for sure.
yeah,
That's hard to believe a lot of times for some of us that have been around for a while. But as you said in the beginning, like I tell people I've done a little bit of everything,
yeah,
from starting an agency to freelancing and consulting, co-founded at least one startup, worked for a bunch of others. And as you said, then I went in-house, working at a few companies where I had the opportunity to build and lead product and design teams. That was Verizon, 23andMe, and most recently LinkedIn.
mhm,
I will say that most of my career, I wasn't boxed into being just one thing. I did all manner of design like many of us back in the day.
right.
Also did some programming and, of course, product management along the way as well.
I mean, yeah, there's a lot of questions I've got, but I'll start at the start. I mean, you say you've done a lot along the way, right? And you've gotten into a lot of different things and really been probably given a lot of opportunities, although maybe you also, sort of sold yourself or just started doing them. But you also went to school for industrial design. How did you even hone your design craft in the first place?
Yeah, I always I've had this in a talk a few times. I always say that industrial design was a great foundation for design thinking.
Hmm.
Air quotes here, design thinking.
Yeah, yeah,
When I was in school, that term didn't exist yet, but it really was born out of industrial design practices. We studied human factors and behavioral psychology and interaction design, the exploration of different form factors, and of course, lots and lots of prototyping. So when I wanted to do digital product design, which was my intention all along, all those skills translated really well. On honing design craft, I will say absolutely just it comes with completing lots and lots of projects. I think that's
yeah.
something that's kind of scary to talk to students about or early in career designers. but you don't come out of school an expert. You have to have that chance to start, and you just have to understand and accept you've got to do it over and over and over again to get really good at any aspect of design or product development for sure. I mean, I
Hmm.
did hundreds of projects in, as again, as many of us did in our first handful of years, right?
Yeah, totally. Well, again, there's this idea that you came out of school and you were in there for ID, and at the same time, you knew you wanted to do digital design. In both of those, there's this word design. What does that mean to you? Like, what is design? And you put air quotes around the design thinking thing, which I totally agree. It's a weird nebulous thing that we throw around. And of course, I'm going to preempt this with lots of people I think still think of design as, hey, we're the ones with the black rim glasses and yeah, exactly. You're wearing black, I'm wearing gray, I'm usually wearing black, right? We're drinking this out of espresso cups and having these highfalutin conversations about the look of things. But I think we both know that that's not what design is. What is design to you?
Yeah, but just a little side note, my family knows that my normal clothing palette is black and very
Yeah.
dark gray for
Yeah.
for the Batman quote. Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, first of all, again, we came up at a time where design meant all of the things that, it's so sudden to today. But
Hmm.
coming up with design and learning design, and I'll, kind of talk to myself for about myself for a second.
Yeah.
When I say I was interested in digital product design, when I was in school, industrial design, particularly the program I was in, was 100% focused on physical manufactured products.
Yeah.
And so I was a little bit of a rogue in that I also hung out in the graphic design labs and not only the classrooms, but the labs around campus. And I incorporated digital product design or digital design in pretty much all of my work, from 3D graphics to digitally laid out design, graphic design presentations and such. So there all of design today has roots in visual design, graphic design, industrial
Sure.
design, et cetera. But for me, this is obviously what is design is a huge question.
Hmm.
And one other little side note is, a lot of people come into design like earlier in their lives from those artistic and creative angles. And I have mad respect for people who are extremely creative and artistic.
Yeah.
I probably have some, many art design books around me,
Yeah.
many, many out of view. But I really always stood by the definition of design as, being about solving problems for people and meeting specific needs and wants. Again, that definition or the language that we use today, like human-centered design, it came about from, other disciplines too, including human factors and human, computer interface and things like that. But one thing that I always say to keep in mind that, the value of design can be big or small. It depends
Okay.
on the scope of the project, depends on the intent of a given project, who owns that work, who is building it. And there's impact on both sides, right? There's a human impact, and from a business sense, there's a financial impact.
Yeah.
Um, and no matter what work you do, they don't need to be mutually exclusive. Like you can have
Hmm.
impact that really does help somebody accomplish something really important in their daily lives. And you can have that impact for a business where you're contributing to a product that, makes lots of money but hopefully
Yeah.
so bringing some positive good or outcome in the world.
Yeah. And to that company, right? Yeah. And not just a shiny thing. Yeah. It's interesting as well that, you also made this leap between an employee, a co-founder a few times. You've started companies. You've mentioned you've worked in-house for LinkedIn. What has driven you then to jump, right? And I'm going to ask you this with a little context here. On one hand, right, you're driving, for instance, some design and you're in a big company like a LinkedIn or a 23andMe or a Verizon, right? Big company, and probably I'm going to make some assumptions because I've worked in some of these companies too, some silos where you're doing design, you're in your lane, you have perhaps you once in a while you sit at the strategic table. and then you're in a startup land or on your own, and you can sit at any table you want. In fact, you run a lot of those tables because you have to. What's driven you to go back and forth through your career?
Yeah, I'll try to keep it short. I was I'll start by saying I was definitely lucky in starting an agency with a bunch of friends early on.
Okay. Yeah.
In a lot of ways, it was easier back then, although you see that whole thing sort of, having a resurgence when people are starting
Hmm.
small agencies, more driven because of the work climate. Back then, it was much more opportunistic just because,
Hmm.
again, just to acknowledge a little bit, there were just way fewer designers in the world. And it was
Yeah.
so segmented. We were all just designers and developers who did everything. So I just give that as a foundation because, again, I think a lot of us that have a few decades of design, it's kind of a cliche at this point, but we say we've had a nonlinear design career, but
Yeah.
pretty much everybody really at the end of the day, or the majority of people do have nonlinear
Yeah.
careers.
Yeah.
Startups were, startups are attractive to some people because, they're entrepreneurial or they want to have a lot of autonomy or they're just thrilled about wearing many hats. I think that's what attracted startups for me after my stint as, starting an agency and then going to freelance.
Hmm.
So that was attractive to me. I felt like I can have my hands in lots of different things. Um,
Right.
and it was great. I had a lot of fun participating in startups, working with people. Name drop, one of them was a big celebrity, which maybe we'll talk about. Um, but I have to admit, I felt like I was on a repeat loop after a while. And that's just the nature of startups. Like, what is it like? 3% or something of startups, whatever the stat is about, that
It's low. Yeah.
right, but it clearly people do it for the love of that,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
that was great, but, it was kind of repeat loop after a while. I hit this stage of my life and career where it was absolutely a grass is greener on the other side kind of thing.
Mhm.
I saw friends and colleagues climbing the corporate ladder, having more responsibility, leading teams more formally, and clearly working on projects at a larger scale. So, I wanted that too.
Yeah.
And so I went in-house and that's, it was great because I was able to learn a ton more doing those things. And we can talk about any specific one if you're interested, but I'll just close this out by saying that I advise designers as often as I can to try out both if they can in their career. One might be, more attractive to them for certain reasons.
Yeah.
And it also can depend on how they are as individual learners, because obviously there's a lot of, in my opinion, and experience, there's a lot more accelerated learning in a smaller team environment, especially
Mhm.
startups. But if they learn, by absorbing activity around from higher level designers, then certainly a bigger company, usually affords that opportunity. So, yeah, so I always advise that for designers to consider.
I love that advice. Makes me think I was actually brought a bunch of students recently to a panel of designers, all who work for Instagram. And they all love working for Instagram. They've worked there for a long time. In fact, to a T, all of them do something different. They're all different creatives. They're content designers and UI, UX. And then there was a visual designer that kind of goes across every single tool that Instagram owns. And they all said almost the exact same thing that you just said, which is there's no direct line to any of this. Try some different things, stretch yourself. You'll gain something like domain expertise, and then you'll be asked to do something else, which means you'll gain some other expertise, right? Or you'll get close enough to it. And so, on one hand, right, perhaps you go into a job doing one thing, or you get hired eventually, or even an internship doing one thing, and be flexible in that, and perhaps even really curious about what the next thing is. And that sounds like that's more or less what you're saying, even jumping around a bit. It's the curiosity going deep sometimes, but also the curiosity about what's on the other side of that depth. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's yeah, you just said everything that is going through my brain of like, and it's also challenging yourself as well, right? It's
Yeah.
trying different environments because not only, this is counter to the age old advice of like sticking at a company for a long time. And of course, there's value in that. But, um, but yeah, even working in different environments, different size teams, different configurations of how companies operate, big and
Mhm.
small, and literally just working with different people. I mean, it's really
Yeah.
important for understanding how to navigate a long career. I mean, you have to be able to communicate with different types of people. You have to be able to really flex your strengths and lean into sometimes your weaknesses to kind of, shore them up, to have that sort of that flexibility and that growth mindset. But in practice, like on the
Yeah.
job, is how it really develops. You can read about things all you want. You can listen to podcasts and
Mm.
interviews all you want, but you have to be out there having those experiences. And so you have to, really let yourself embrace those challenges.
I love it. Did you have a big break somewhere in there? Like what, and if so, what was your big break into this career that you have?
Yeah. Two things come into mind. Tell me what sounds more interesting, or if you want me to cover both. Um, the first is about the agency that
Yeah.
both started.
Hmm.
And the second is like a big mid career, I wouldn't say pivot, but a pretty big project that, kind of set the stage for second phase of my career.
Yeah, that's a good one. I'd love to hear actually about the second one. Yeah, I'm really interested in what causes people to pivot, and how do they find those, whether it's a first career, a second career, or a fifth one.
Cool. I promise you this, this was a choose your own adventure. So
Yeah. As any interview should be. Yes, there's this
granted,
great
this,
line.
this project might have come up, but it
Um,
wasn't, it was a as needed basis. I'll talk about the project Dip Dive. So this is my hashtag name drop moment
oh,
working
cool.
for a celebrity. But what's important is how I got that job. First of all, it okay. So I'm trying to take a step back here. So without getting too far back into my past,
Hmm.
some people through a first job, which isn't even, I don't really talk about this much, but it is part of my history. But that job and that network of people, we had a falling off very early in my career. And it kind of speaks to the whole networking thing, like how
Yeah,
important networking is. I know we all talk about it so much. So it's good
yeah.
when students or early in career people hear this over and over that it really does matter. So this job for the celebrity who I'll say now is Will I Am of the Black Eyed Peas.
Hey, yeah.
And some people that sounds really exciting and impressive, and some people are like, who? It doesn't matter. But that job came about because I was reached out by from people from that old network
Huh.
where, there was a burn, there was a bridge, not just burned, but like burned to the ground.
Yeah, it was ashes.
It was many years later, and I was really touched that this person reached out to me and said, that was water under the bridge. I've seen what you've been up
Hmm.
to lately. We've got this lead on a project, and that's really how that project came to be. How I came to join this platform development called Dip Dive, and it was a social network slash. I kid you not. At the end of the day, like I compare it to like Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Spotify, uh, message. It literally had the kitchen sink of social networking things. And that's because it was, the desire of Will.i.am
Yeah,
very much. He's still very active in the technology scene. He's
yeah,
a technologist besides being a musician and a band, frontman, a rapper, hip hop artist. And yeah, it was a really cool project. And I was just brought on as a contractor, and technically really was a contractor through the whole duration of 4 years. But, based on what the skills I brought to the table and then just the experience I had had already, I quickly elevated to being like a go-to guy for that project.
huh.
There was technically a CEO. It's so funny. I kid you not. I literally just found this. I swear this wasn't staged. This was in a jacket I haven't worn for years. I have an old business card sitting here on my
That's funny.
desk, and it says VP of Product Management. I,
Uh-huh.
I don't use that title. on LinkedIn or anything else because it is inflated title, right? And
Mhm.
I just dealt with it. Like I
Mhm.
hold my own title the way when I talk about this publicly, but it speaks to the fact that I attained this level where I was a go-to guy. I was with the CEO all over the world, including
Right.
dozens, if not 100 meetings with Will.i.am and all manner of celebrities, entertainment people. Um, and so that was huge. And more importantly, the project, I got to do a little bit of everything, like,
Yeah.
executive management, product management, contributing to design. I won't say coding, but I was definitely like reviewing code
Sure.
just as another body to do it. And business operations as well. So, I oversaw the product managers, I oversaw the designers. I supported the engineerings. We had much more experienced engineering leadership. And yeah, it's a big part of my career and a lot of fun. But yeah, getting to your point, I mean, that was a big break and it really set the stage for, the next phases of my career.
Well, before that, that is a big break. And, for anyone that doesn't know, and you mentioned already, I think Will.i.am has been featured in Fast Company more than a few times, right? And a bunch of tech magazines for some audacious, big swings too. Lots of things that have failed, and I'm certain that there are a few that have made it. And without knowing a lot, my guess is, he's probably made it, whether it's through investments or something like that, more than he's failed, at least perhaps financially anyways. He's still a big name and certainly probably bigger in music, but yeah, he's a technologist. He's been around for a long time. So you get hired by Dip Dive, and were you hired as a designer or were you hired as VP of product management? Or would it like what was that what how did that big break unfurl and unfold so that you landed, all over the world with the CEO and Will.i.am, at conferences and pitches and everything else?
Yeah, I kid you not. And this isn't a story I've got to tell very much in this detail. Although I am r- recalling it more these days, is I was literally hired to create a Flash video player.
Yeah, I sort of figured it was going to be something like that.
That
Sure.
was
Yeah.
that was it. I had done a
Yeah.
lot of Flash development
Mhm.
in our agency, and then later as a freelance and contractor consultant. That was it. They're like, "Hey, we heard you're doing some really cool Flash development." I'm like, "Yeah, sure." And yeah, I mean, I just stepped up to the plate, like in the
Yeah.
meetings, and there weren't the consulting company I was working through was still a bit scrappy, and not very formal. And so that opportunity was just there to keep stepping up, taking on more responsibility, participating, like being that person that, there wasn't a product manager really.
Yeah.
I just sort of leaned into that role. I'm like, hey, like, we need to have a centralized place to write documentation and to share things. And,
Hmm.
the group of developers that worked on that were both here in the Bay Area and in the Netherlands as well. There's a whole nother connection,
Yeah.
teams working together. And
Yeah.
there needed to be some person that really kept the communication going on and developed the internal processes for, not only doing design, but also operationally. So, yeah, so that's really what it was about, just like growing into that role frankly, very rapidly.
Yeah.
So, yes, I was still contributing to design, sometimes in pixels, but more so I started hiring designers and just leaning into that leadership role.
Yeah. And how did you even know that this company needed all of those functions in the first place? I know you were mid-career at this point, or probably early-ish mid-career. How did you even know that, hey, you should be doing documentation in one place and you kind of need someone to lead product and not just make a Flash interface?
Yeah, listen, I swear this is not any sort of like humble brag, but it sort of speaks to the fact that I didn't have a traditional job career. So I really
Okay.
didn't learn this from other people per se.
Yeah.
That being said, because of having had an agency and to operationally
Mhm.
build my own business, just the logistics of organizing things and multiple projects and work streams made sense to me.
Yeah.
I did learn being a service provider to companies, to large companies and how they operated and expected things to be done. And then also, during a stretch of freelancing, which this is sort of the tail end of my freelancing stage, I did work with some startups, big and small, and at least saw that, they had like PRDs and pitch decks and things.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I can do all that stuff and nobody else is doing it. So I'm just
Yeah.
gonna start doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, I've noticed the same in my career, mostly in product and technology. And I found my way in as I will put the quotes around it as a designer, but mostly business design in more than anything. But I certainly found my way in that way, which is sitting with designers, for instance, at Autodesk, many of which I would call some of my really good friends, and eventually sort of saying, "Hey, we're just doing this together. There's no
Right.
Justin as the senior PM writing a PRD, right, and an MRD and all these things. We're just doing it together. I don't know why there's a separation. And so it's really interesting to hear you say the same thing. Like, yeah, it's designers are doing this too, and you kind of start doing it. And it sounds like it's as much through curiosity and stretching yourself as it is, any other reason.
Yeah, we can move on, but I'll just say one thing in reflection of what you just said,
Yeah.
which is, I think again, us coming up, we got to do that opportunistically.
Yeah.
And you did speak at one point earlier about siloing, and it's kind of a shame that the
Yeah.
industry of development, production, design, technology has become so siloed. It's why there's been such fragmentation, even specifically in design. I have
Yeah.
a slide which I show students that literally has like hundreds of different types of design titles, which
Mhm.
sometimes gets into the whole generalist versus specialist debate. But in a good way, even though the industry is a mess right now, it seems like there's a little bit of crashing of those silos.
Yeah.
The one good thing that's happening is like, maybe we'll talk about it later. I have this
Yeah.
soapbox about, designers that could and should also consider becoming product managers. And this is exactly why. It's like, where are the boundaries and why? It's like,
Yeah.
who wrote the rules? And
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Who wrote the rules indeed. It actually speaks to, and I want to use this as maybe as a transition to some stuff I want to talk to you about, specifically about product. And sort of now we're starting to see the melding of design and product in some interesting ways. But I'd love for you to also then just talk a little bit about what you do today, right? And what drives you. And I'll say this as a part of that transition and just getting to know you a little bit. And I certainly know your LinkedIn and what you're doing today, and also the book you wrote. It is both product and design, right? You're really consulting and on both of those things and working with companies in both those ways. What is that? How do you speak to what you do today, and also what drives you as part of that?
yeah, I wish what I was doing today sounded more exciting. And,
That's good.
and
Yeah,
maybe I'm putting on a decent front and LinkedIn, et cetera, like most people.
right.
Um,
Remember, you and I have both been around for a long time, and
right.
probably third or fourth career. So what sounds exciting to someone else is probably sounds droll to us. But yeah,
Totally.
yeah,
We get the game.
yeah.
Uh, I mean, I'll be honest, like people are asking me like, "Are you looking for a job?" And again, it's not a humble brag.
Mhm.
But I'm not actively looking for a job. You know, I don't know, call it whatever you want. I mean, call it a career break, call it a hiatus, call it a
Mhm.
sabbatical. It doesn't matter. I definitely been taking a step back and I'll be honest, like writing the book, we wrote it because we really legitimately want to help people get
Yeah,
in this field. We think the field is worthy and, it's messy. It's really, really probably the worst time to come out with this kind of a book, given the marketing or the market. But, we still believe in, I say we, my wife and I,
hmm
we still believe in it. She's actively an instructor in design.
hmm
She's got a day job. Um, but it's given me the time to just really continue mentoring people. So I do a lot of mentorship. I talk with all levels of designers, from students to early in career, to mid level, looking to advance. But I really enjoy working with like the super seniors, those high level IC
Uh,
managers or people that want to get into management, and the occasional design leader. I have a few people I talk with that are director or higher, who, have teams of like 20 or 30 people. So I love talking about those things. It's like we're trying to bring the value of our experience and share them as much as possible.
yeah,
Um, I've been having fun giving talks at schools, which has been great. That's also a route to promote the book. Again, nobody writes a book to get rich. So trust me when I'm saying that's
I know
not
that to be true. Yes.
a major source of income by any
Uh-huh.
stretch.
Uh-huh.
I'm also not good at social media. I've been burned out by working in the industry for so long.
Sure.
But besides all of that, I've got the writing bug, so I'm doing more of that too. I definitely have a good skeleton of a second book that's less tactical and more
Nice.
experiential. So
Yeah, nice.
that's what I've been up to.
All right, I love it. Yeah, and what I'm hearing there is a lot of bridging the gap and then also helping to foster, maybe up and coming leaders and companies that are really looking for whatever their through line is into leadership and perhaps to have similar experiences to you.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure. I will say, for the record, if anybody needs a consultant for a product or a team or a startup,
there you go.
it's available. I haven't been advertising it hardcore, but I'm completely open to that as well.
All right, well, let's get there. One of the ways I want to talk about that again because you really I wouldn't even say you straddle the line between design and product. You are just design and product. And I don't think for you there's much of a boundary. And what I'm noticing is that yeah, I mentioned silos earlier, and that's just because of where I come from, and I think some of where you come from too, at least early in my career. But I feel like those boundaries are starting to come down in a way that's interesting in that product leaders are now leaning hard into design in ways that I didn't see before. I certainly didn't experience when I was working heavily in tech before. And, I think two things are true here. One is what we're seeing is with all these vibe coding tools, right? The idea of a technical moat is disappearing, if not already gone, right? Any one of us can get on one of these vibe coding tools, whether it's Cursor or Windsurf or Bolt or Lovable, whatever it is, and type in something, and boom, we have an app, right? And we see the code. It does, who cares? The app works, and that's all that matters. Um, and with that, then you see that, well, then perhaps experience is the thing that's, that people are wanting from this. And then, you know, the other thing I'm seeing is design leaders just leaning in hard to something like that. So there's a long-winded way of saying I was listening to Lenny's podcast the other day, and he had Varun Mohan on, and he's the co-founder CEO of the vibe coding platform Windsurf, and he went pretty deep talking about UX and that's a distinguishing factor of Windsurf. And here's a guy who came from MIT. He's a coder. He's an engineer's engineer. He hires engineers, and he almost didn't talk anything about Windsurf as a engineered platform. He talked about it as a specifically designed platform and an experience for people to go into. In fact, so much so that in this podcast, he drew something on a page and put it in there in Windsurf experience, and it turned it into an app and yada, yada, yada. Amazing. Here you are, you've had roles in both of these. And where do you see that intersection? What do you see happening in this, especially in tech, in the tech field of design and product perhaps merging or the silos breaking down? And even more, I'm going to end this with another question as part of that two-part question. How can designers stand out here, right, with that breaking down of those barriers?
Yeah.
It's a lot there, so I'm going to leave you with
No,
that. Yeah.
it is a lot, and I'm trying to shape my own 5 points of things that are just raging in my head. The first, let me just first say that on the technology revolution that we're in again. Now I'm a technologist.
Yeah.
We all are. So we
Mhm.
came up through many waves of disruptive technology. So from that sort of sides, not outsider perspective, but of a little bit removed perspective, I can appreciate all of it. I mean, it's amazing. It really is. The capabilities are mind blowing. Um, and so let me just say on the most positive side of things, we as designers and developers and creators, we have to embrace these things. We have to understand what their capabilities are. We have to decide where they fit in the work that we want to do. We need to draw our own personal lines on, the ethical and responsible use of AI and technology.
Yeah.
Don't get me too much started on it. Maybe we'll revisit it later.
Okay.
Getting to the point about the intersection of design and product and engineering too at this point. Uh, I've also had mad respect for anybody that can do it all.
Yeah. Okay.
It's an unrealistic expectation for everybody to be able to do that. And so designers shouldn't necessarily be frustrated they can't do it all, but they at least need to be experimenting with these things. In the very least, what I tell designers, especially early in career, the more you understand those things and how they work, not just the tools, but even the responsibilities of these different disciplines, it will absolutely just make you a better collaborator. And that
Mm.
is so important unless you're a solo creator, which most people at the end of the day for a career are not. So
Right.
it's really important just from that standpoint. Now, getting more narrow to the point of like product and design, as I said earlier, and as you've noted, like I have played both the roles. And so, you know, I've called this my soapbox for many, many years, even though it's been popping up in the discourse a lot lately. And that's this thing that, like I said earlier, like I kind of nudge designers every now and again if I see that they lean to that logic minded brain, operational thing, putting the ideas and strategies and visions into words, not just screens. I say, like, you might be a really great product manager. Like, have you considered it? Um, and so, I even gave a presentation on this last summer and I had a bit of a self-deprecating humor in it. And this is like, point three in my brain. Um, in that I say self-deprecating because as designers of our generation, I feel like we have to own up to some responsibility and not just complain about what I'm about to say. What I'm about to say is we partially created this whole state of things. Like,
Ah, yes.
again, it gets back to design thinking. We invited our partners into the process.
Hmm.
We kind of exposed and, they even the term, was kind of bandied about for a while, like everybody can be a designer.
Hmm.
And we sort of like we shared all the parts that were hard to do. I'm not saying screen design and pixels are easy to do, but guess what? What's proven out? They are easier to do wireframes and mock-ups and, you know, y- design kits, things like that. So we kind of have to own up to that a little bit. And that's why I'm kind of snarkily saying like, hey, let's push back. Like we can get some of those responsibilities that product managers have.
Yeah.
You just have to be open to it. You have to be open to understanding. I call it the Venn diagram. Like there's a Venn diagram that's very overlappy between
Hmm.
and design. And this isn't to exclude engineering, but for the sake of this conversation,
Hmm.
the middle overlap is like vision and user research
Yes.
and
Yes.
identifying problems and needs, like jobs to be done, writing out user stories, having this experimental mindset, defining what an MVP is. That's a whole nother argument we can talk about.
Mhm.
And then responsibility for launching things and learning. Now, then you look at the product management side or the design side. Yeah, there's very specific skills and responsibilities, but if you're willing to kind of dip into those areas, you can, as a designer, straddle that line as well. And like we just acknowledged, that's starting to happen both ways. So
Hmm.
I can't be completely mad at product people. Like design is fun at the end of the day,
It
also.
is. Yeah.
It should be.
Yeah.
So can we fault them for wanting to participate, especially if the tools are making it easier?
Right.
Okay, I'll save my last point if if and when we come back to a bigger discussion about AI, because I know that was kind of long and maybe sort of answered that question.
It sort of did, and I'd like to just we
Oh,
move
I
on.
didn't talk about standout.
Yeah, talk about how they stand out. Yep.
Standout. So this sort of does fit a little bit. So
Okay.
I say designers can, and again, we'll talk about it more, but it is like the $1 million question, like how do I stand out? But
Hmm.
for the sake of this answer or this area of conversation, I think a designer can stand out if they straddle that line a little bit more. And it speaks to what I said earlier of like, hey, if they express an understanding, if they're really good in their case studies about telling that narrative, that they understood how their work contributed to the bottom line, or that they
Hmm.
understood metrics, or they how they utilize insights from analytics or metrics or user research. It sort of shows that willingness and or that capability of being a good collaborator. That's one thing. And then maybe the other one I'll just sort of seed is that maybe we can come back to is designers just like I'm sure we all beat this drum so much. They have to be good storytellers.
Yeah,
Have to
yeah,
be good storytellers. And I think that's part of what all of these tools are enabling is getting those prototypes or those functional things, which are a good stand-in for storytelling. It's like making the
yeah.
tangible ideas and storytelling at the end of the day, and what some product managers in a from a different angle are sometimes good at.
Yep,
The key to like inspiring people and influencing decisions. So
yep. Yeah, I hear you on that. Um, Having been a product manager, and humbly, I'd say I was a pretty good product manager. I can attest that it came down to storytelling, right? And what is product, right? Product is the face of the product management, anyways, the face of the product to the customer, and the face of the customer back to the product, and that's about it. And the other thing that I think product managers are good at, and I think this is also where you were going with that in terms of storytelling and being part of that process, is product managers are making these decisions all day. And that's what product does, right? We make a decision. It doesn't mean that everyone loves it. In fact, most of the time, there's definitely a bunch of people who don't like the decision, but someone makes that decision. And what I'm hearing you say in some of that as well is that that seat at the table also comes from, yeah, don't just bring the data, help to define what that decision is, and maybe even make the decision and back it up with a story about here's why and here's what the decision is. Let's move on. Something like that. Is that right?
yeah, yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And that's like the stickiest stuff that I don't know if I'm an oddball or something, but I geek out on that participation. The big word that everybody throws about is like strategy, strategy, strategy.
Yeah, right.
Like, but when you boil it down to what does that mean? And this is what I tell designers all the time. It's like what does strategy mean? And I ask it as a question, but my
Hmm.
answer is that strategy is participating in those debates, those negotiations, sometimes those arguments. Sometimes you have to state your case. Sometimes you have to concede. But in all that process, when you participate in all of that activity, you are participating in strategy. And at the end of the day, the more active you are, sometimes you will, influence and win those arguments or
Yeah,
convince, thus influencing roadmap, thus influencing
yeah,
sequence of building things, thus influencing what is the definition of MVP. So yeah, I mean that's everything you said just maps really closely to what's always been in my brain as well.
yeah. Cool. Again, and I've sat at the table with designers doing exactly that, and I think when you make decisions together and then leadership or whoever needs to see that, now you're really partners. And again, that not only does that blurred line go away, but strategy, right? Strategy is the table that I think a lot of designers want to sit at. And that's what you're doing, right? You're erasing that line and making decisions, and right, and having now a seat at that table to define some future. You mentioned, and now I'd like to talk a little bit about that future in terms of AI. You had something in mind what is it about AI, and maybe even what role do you see it playing now? We're not even in the future of design. Like, what role is it playing now and in like these futures?
Yeah, I mean, let's see, how much more can I say about it? Okay, all right. So again, trying to start with the pot. Well, no, let me take a step back. So this is a funny. It, it's an old joke in a lot of people I talk with about AI.
Hmm.
It just needs to drop out of my story blank here. But it was the beginning of 2023, and I recorded a podcast with Adrian. So sorry, Adrian, you're being outed.
Yeah.
And a colleague of ours about AI, and we had a fascinating conversation. I think it was like an hour and a half,
Wow.
and we edited it down, and we said, "Oh, we're gonna put it out in two parts." And by the time we did all that, it was completely outdated. So that's just one little thing. But the reason why I bring that up is I'll tell you what my hardcore stance was at that time.
Hmm.
I still I still maintain part of my perspective. That being said, we're a year and a half, almost 2 years later. Or no, we're 2 years later now. Man, time just flies. We're over 2 years later.
Yeah.
And of course, my perspective has changed. The tools have continued to evolve. They're more advanced, as you described. People are making prototypes with them. They're vibe coding
Hmm.
multiple things. It's really cool. So I do stand by what I said earlier in our conversation. I love it as well, but we need to find that balance. There's two parts that irk me about it. So again, as far as the technology and development, we just have to embrace it. We have to understand where it fits, all that stuff, not to repeat it, but we have to find out where it fits in our design process, development process. I just have to talk about the two things that do still frustrate me. The first is just the ethical side of things. Like, I have mad respect. I keep saying mad respect. I just have utmost respect for creators,
Yeah.
both artists and writers. And it just infuriates me to no end that people's books by the thousands have been used to train. People's creative artwork, by the millions have been used to train.
Mhm.
So it frustrates me. All those applications using AI just frustrate me to no end. And of course, there's also, the practical environmental impacts like that people
Sure.
keep trying to raise. Again, what can we do about it besides not use it as much as we are?
Mhm.
Uh, but the second part is where I feel like, this is my old guy designer perspective, and I'm trying to double check myself. Am I too much of a Luddite, and all this? But it gets back to what I said very early in our conversation about those design reps, those hundreds of projects
Yes.
that somebody needs to do to inherently really grasp foundations of design, really grasp, you know, human thinking. And so that's the part, and this is the part that was in the podcast that we recorded that never released, that I stand by, is that I just really, really, really impress upon designers at all levels to not just think of it as a shortcut.
Mm.
Yes, figure out where it fits. Like, if you're doing it to help do research, fine. If you're doing it to help
Mhm.
brainstorm a little bit, maybe fine. Uh,
Mhm.
but don't use it. Don't just completely outsource your critical thinking skills, and absolutely don't outsource your decision making. You still have to question the
Yeah.
results, etc. It's so hard. It's such a conundrum, because I get, like, if it's helping people make a prototype faster, great. And if you're using that prototype to get real testing done and then you make decisions, great. But if you're just using to build something and just say, now I built the product, um, that's frustrating. I don't know. And so
Yeah.
yeah, that's you can tell I'm like, I'm like, I've got emotions, right? And
You
that's how
do.
I feel about it.
Yeah. It brings up, I mentioned before that I was here and I brought up a bunch of students to Instagram. And one of the things they said, besides this idea of having a bit of depth, but also really breadth and flexibility, the decision making they talked about was, they called it taste. They said at Meta, not just Instagram, but at Meta, and in all of their careers, which not all of them had, worked at Meta for their entire lives. They've worked everywhere. Everyone, when someone brought up taste, they all nodded, "Yep, that's the thing." And that's the thing I'm hearing you say, right? With the thousands of reps and, your 10,000 hours or your 2,000 hours, whatever it might be, I'm finding the same. Designers and design isn't just about this design method, right? Of interrogating and ideation and prototyping and validate. Eventually, design is also made and creative products by humans is also made because we have taste, right? And we can evaluate something and say, that's the one, that color, and here's why, right? I feel this, I have agency here. And so I'm kind of hearing you say that, and I'm just kind of reflecting it back on you, which is, and I'm seeing your nod, but I'd love to hear you talk just a little bit about it. And I know we're almost at an hour. Yeah, this idea of taste, and that's our job as designers too. And maybe first and foremost.
Yeah, yeah. It is amazing. I'll be critical for a second. Like these there's been a bunch of articles popping up. I started seeing them as maybe earlier, but I saw them like late last year. I saw some design colleagues writing about this the other day. I had to jump on the bandwagon. I just posted about it
Yeah.
last week or wrote a newsletter about it. It's because we covered again a very short opinion snippet in our book about taste towards the end.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's great. So the critical part is like, as designers, or we're sort of like, where can we retreat back to like show our value? And it's this word taste came up. But yeah, you just hinted at it. Like taste, it sounds like this, magical thing. And it's true. We talk about it as like you either have taste or you don't have taste, right? And there's terms like tastemaker, which basically is like somebody says something is cool, it becomes cool. And that does happen. There's no doubt, right? That happens. But as designers, it's fine if we leave that sort of like elusive, kind of cool sounding trait out there. But at the end of the day, for designers, it's about that I like to call it, and in our book, we say taste is really just design sense. And it's like, what is
Oh,
design sense? Like design
yeah.
is something that we build up over time based on knowing the foundations of why things are effective, why
Yeah.
things work well. And then we start to build that into our lens of evaluating things. It makes it into our practice. And even if we don't call it that, at the end of the day, you just said it, like we pick blue, we suggest a shade of blue because of these reasons. We
Hmm.
have the justification. Now, if we want to keep that magical in the back of our head, fine. I actually think we need to be doing a little bit more of that these days. But hopefully our taste is defined by making those evaluative decisions. Like why is,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, objectively better than this other option, or to have a counterpoint. This is like, again, this is a classic design thing to say. It's like you have to know the rules before you can break them, or when you have all those reps of doing design, evaluating design out in the wild, whether it's physical products, signage, spaces,
Mm.
have you, we notice those things, and even though we might be critical sometimes, our brains kind of click and say like, oh, but that might have been a really specific decision by the creator of the
Yeah.
design. And
Yeah.
oh, isn't that cool? Whether we know it or not,
Right.
we at least give that option. And
Right.
that kind of bakes into our thinking as well.
Okay. Amazing. And that brings me I've got two more
Yeah.
questions, and one's
Yeah.
the closing one. Knowing all that, and yeah, you have great taste. Of course, you're wearing black, and and you probably have the black framed glasses as well. I certainly do. Um, what's one thing you'd want to redesign in your life?
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge question,
Yes.
and a great one, and one, we often go to for interviewing designers, and I
Hmm.
tell them to have good answers. But for me, at this stage, you've probably heard it many times already in this conversation. I really respect amazing physical product designers, visual designers, graphic designers, apps, websites, whatever, what have you. So all that digital stuff, it's not that I feel like I've done it all, but I have done a lot of those things. I'm not saying that they were great necessarily, but when I think about what I want to be redesigned or what I'd want to participate in redesigning, honestly, I think about things that I haven't done in my career, which are the much bigger, more challenging, systemic things.
Yeah.
And not to sound too high minded necessarily, but the things that and not also to sound too of the moment because it's a longer standing thought I've had in my head, but things like government and education
Mm.
and, you know, conservation, like it's such a shame. I tell people like, please look at all the other places designers are needed,
Yeah.
and it's not just from the do good standpoint. It's because those places really do need or can really be serviced by design. So it's such a shame that they're only attracted to a small segment of people that want to go into those spaces. It's very unfortunate that they don't pay very well
Right.
and that, it's never a high priority. But yeah, something in those spaces would be attractive to me to participate in. How can you make them better?
Yeah.
They're just really either overly complex or broken.
Yeah. I love that. And, and when I think about you talking about you saying that maybe they don't pay very well. Well, that also could be design too, right? Here I come from that product sort of business designer background. It's like, oh, okay, well maybe that's the broken thing too.
Right.
Maybe that's the real problem. It's not that it's not that those systems are broken, but so is the system by which, value is exchanged, for designing those systems is also broken. So let's do that too. Um, okay, I'm going to end this with the final question is, where can people find you and your book?
Yeah, I'm absolutely online. As I said earlier, I'm not like some social media. I'm not trying to be a social media influencer of any kind. There's
Right.
much cooler people that have more time on their hands and are more energetic about it. But yeah, I'm on LinkedIn is probably the best place, but there's a website, designcareerbook.com. Uh, you know, I'm on Instagram, not really on X anymore, but LinkedIn's probably the first place to go.
Cool. Cool. And that's it. And again, I've read and handed out a bunch of the Design Career Handbook book to my students, and it is fantastic and indispensable. And I'm excited that you're writing another one. It'll be fun.
Cool. Yeah, thank you so much, Justin. I really appreciate this opportunity. It's a fun conversation
Of
today.
course. Yeah, likewise. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening to Design Shift. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a quick rating or review. It really helps more designers like you find the show, and it helps me make better shows. And if you're not already subscribed to our awesome newsletter, head over to designshift.me. See you next time.